Thank you for tuning in to Talkwad.com, the world's fastest growing internet radio network. Please check out all the other great shows on www.talkwad.com.
Hi there, and welcome to Right at 5. I'm your host, Mona Lisa, and I have two really amazing guests with me here today, Lynn Hanson and Sally Bosco, and I can't talk today. Hi.
Hi.
So we have like only an hour, and I'm going to have to bring you guys back. I already know that because there's just so much amazing stuff for both of these ladies. They do individual work as well as having collaborated on something recently. So I'm going to start with Lynn. She's written 7 young adult novels, including 2 young adult historical horror novels, The Change and the Return, 3 young adult time travel historicals, and an SAT vocabulary novel, which I was going through earlier. Brave New World. Yay. Very cool. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, Lynn, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been a horror writer from as long as I can remember. I love to kind of mix the. I'm a big history buff too, so a lot of my work incorporates uh, history and horror. So I have like zombies during the Revolutionary War and
Awesome.
werewolves in frontier Kansas, and so I'm also a research geek, so I love all the research. Even though you research and you get like volumes and volumes of information that you learn about an era, and then tiny little bit goes into the book.
So definitely the history buff. And that's good when as a writer, we should be doing that anyway, I feel. Are you local? Are you from here or?
I've been in Tampa about 25 years, originally from Peoria, Illinois, and actually a tiny little town outside of Peoria, Germantown Hills. And but been down here. I consider Tampa my hometown, I guess now.
Yeah, and that's when you've been transplanted this long, it's home. So Sally writes dark fiction. Notice that's why. She is inexplicably drawn to the uncanny, the shades of gray between the light and dark, the area where your mind hovers as you're falling off to sleep. She loves writing young adult fiction because she strongly relates to teenage angst, the search for self-identity, and the feelings of being an outsider. Sally, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I guess my first love is writing young adult. I just somehow really relate to it, even though I'm way too old to be able to relate to it, really. But I really do relate to it. I guess that, like I said, that feeling of being an outsider. But I also love kind of creepy books. I like horror, but not blood and guts slasher kind of horror. I like something that's sort of creepy, like maybe ghost stories or different kinds of dimensions. That's what I'm really drawn to. So I've been a corporate slave, and I was able to stop working, and now I'm freelancing, doing some freelance writing and writing fiction full time.
That's awesome.
And something that really influenced me a lot was getting an MFA at Seton Hill University. I feel like my writing really, really improved from that.
Education's always a great catalyst for things. Um, so we were kind of having a little bit of a discussion in the hallway, and then we decided, we really needed to kind of bring it to the table. As you all know, if you've been listening to the show, one of the main things that I do, and the reason that I have the show, is I like to bring writers, to the forefront, because generally, when you talk about the arts, it's musicians and painters and people that draw and, dancers. And it's rare that you actually get to step inside the mind of a writer, which is a pretty amazing place and a scary place often. but I also like to talk about, where the motivation comes from, if there's a writing process. And I think in this case today that we should definitely talk about publishing and some of the fallacies that are out there about what you can and can't do as a writer. I learned some things. I'm going to step up my game. So I'd like to start out with what your motivation, why did you start writing? Why a writer?
Um, I actually decided I was going to be a writer the summer after my senior year in high school, because I was really good in school, but I was kind of equally good in all subjects except for math. and so I thought, there couldn't be a cooler job than to get to learn whatever I wanted to learn about and then write a book and then have somebody pay me. I mean, it was just like that would be the dream job. And so I've gotten to, in addition to writing fiction, I do a lot of like um, test prep materials, like FCAT test prep, where I get to write different articles that appeal to teens. I've been in a Pearson textbook. I actually got fan mail from my textbook work.
Wow. Okay, that's
and
saying a lot right there.
but for me, it's the thing that allows me to diversify the most and still make a living.
And do you have a process? Do you like light candles and chant before you write? And do you write by hand? Do you write? We're all sitting here with our iPads. I love that kind of technology. I fought it. I really did. Very, very, very much. But do you have a process, a place you can write or can't write? Can you write when it's loud or?
My husband and I are both authors. We have a 3-bedroom house, so we can each have our own office. and because he and I have very different processes, and I have to have like chunks of time where I just sit and focus, and I make playlists of music that tie into my characters, and he can't have music on when he writes, and so he's like this kind of, he flits between projects, and so we have to have separate offices. But I do a lot of kind of brainstorming and working out of ideas by hand in a notebook. And there's just something about the process of actually putting the pen to the paper that really helps with brainstorming. But when it comes to the actual writing, I do it all on the computer or on my Alpha Smart, which is, are you familiar with these?
No. Uh-oh.
I guess they're called Neo. The newest version is called a Neo, and it is absolutely fantastic. It's um, about 1.5 sizes of an iPad, and it's made with what seems like really cheap plastic, and it's just a keyboard with 4 lines of text. And all it does is it lets you type. You cannot check your email. You cannot play Bejeweled again. You can only
Oh.
type. And then when you're done, you connect it to your computer and open up Word and hit send, and it boop.
Oh, more technology I need to look into. Yes, because I am distracted if
Hun-
I'm
It's fantastic. $149, 75 hours of battery life on 3 AA batteries, light. I take it anywhere we travel.
okay. I'm gonna definitely look into that. Sally, why a
Well,
writer?
what motivates me to write it? Well, I started out as an artist and a dancer, and I've always been good at artwork, and I've been always been kind of good at writing too. But the artwork was always my primary function. Somewhere along the line, it shifted, and I don't exactly know why. And I think it was from reading Anne Rice. I just got to like
Oh,
Anne Rice so much, and I
yes.
got so drawn into her world with the vampires. I started thinking I'd like to do that, and I find writing very similar to doing artwork. It's kind of like sculpting in that you take this story and you sort of get it down and then refine it. And same thing with painting too. So I find the two similar that painting was like telling a story and writing is telling a story. So I that's just my creative outlet of choice now.
Okay. And what's your process?
For process, well, for one thing, it's like I need to get out of the house to write. I need to go to Starbucks, Panera. I don't know why. It's like I need that background noise. If I'm home, I distract myself or the cats walk on my laptop. I just need to get out of the house, and it works really well for me. Another thing I do is I do this workshop, teach a workshop in binge writing. And that is trying to write as much of your novel as you can in 3 days. But there's a lot of preparation involved in that. And so, first of all, I'd come up with an idea and I would try to outline it. Now, I use Blake Snyder's Save the Cat as
Okay.
my methodology of outlining. So I outline it to the point where I really have all the scenes down. I do character sketches. I write the first couple of chapters because you can spend a lot of time fiddling around with those. And I really try and get myself excited about the project. Then I clear out 3 days and just write. And you really can get quite a bit done. I mean, I think for a simple book, you might be able to get the whole book done. But 3 days is just about the right amount of time to keep up that speed and motivation.
Right, right. Um, so Lynn, I'm going to have you talk about your books. Tell us about the books you've written. I've got some here, by the way. I'm really excited about this one, by the way. But go ahead.
Um, let's see. I actually wrote The Return, which was my very first novel, when I was auditioning to be a ghostwriter for R.L. Stine. He had this wonderful series called Fear Street Sagas, and which was historical horror, YA. And I actually pitched an idea. I got it approved. I was working full time, and so I went and I wrote the book in 6 weeks while getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and writing before I had to be at work at 8. And then at lunch, I would like eat with one hand and write with the other. I did this for 6 weeks and I packaged up the book and got ready for the mail. And then I thought, I'll call and let them know it's on its way. And they're like, I'm sorry, we've already bought another Revolutionary War zombie novel. I'm like, because there's so many on the shelves. I mean, I was devastated. And I did what I speak in schools a lot, and I love to talk to kids. 'Cause I don't think I could write books if I didn't get to talk to kids. And but I did what I tell all the kids never to do, which is I totally abandoned that book for a really long time. And because I was just so disheartened to feel that close and then not connect. And so it was a couple years later. My husband's also a writer, and at the time, we always joked and said someday when we got to be on Oprah, not that anybody gets to be on Oprah anymore, but
I know.
when it's a tragedy for
I know,
writers.
yes.
But someday when we got to be on Oprah, was it going to be Jeff Strand and his lovely wife Lynn, who also writes, or is it going to be Lynn Hansen and her hubby Jeff, who also writes? And so, because there's always one person who's more famous. Because if you get Stephen King and his wife Tabitha King, who also writes, it's never going to be, Tabitha King and her hubby Steve. So he was joking about that on a discussion list and signed his email, Lynn Hansen's husband, www.lynnhansen.com. And a newer publisher read his post, thought he was funny because he kind of is, and went to my website and read sample chapters of something else I had up there and said, let me see the real book, the rest of that book. And I said, oh, not that one, but let me show you this one. And in 2 days I had a contract. Because that day, Jeff Strand was Lynn Hansen's husband.
Wow. And that, yeah, I'm reading. It's after their older brother dies in one of the first battles of the Revolutionary War, 16-year-old twins Molly and Jacob Gray discover a way to bring him back to life. The initial side effects, including a marauding zombie arm, seem to disappear in a couple of days. So when Molly's boyfriend is run over by a wagon, they decide to resurrect him as well. Only too late do they find out that they have turned the two people they love the most into the living dead. I love zombies, by the way. My daughter is like a zombie-holic. Like when she has her wedding, she's having zombie husband and wife cake topper. That's, yeah. So, okay. And you also have here The Change.
That's Werewolves in Frontier, Kansas. It's set during the same time as like Little House on the Prairie.
Okay.
But Little House on the Prairie was set in eastern Kansas, where there are these, rollicking fields and trees and water. And this is set in western Kansas, where there's prairie and dirt. and everybody, there aren't even rocks to build your house out of. And I'm like, oh, and teenagers have to work on the farm. They don't get to go to school. So, I mean, the most horrible thing for a teenager would be not to be around other teenagers and to have, your house made out of sod. And it's like, oh, that is just that's like the armpit of the world. Like, oh, that would be so cool. And because you want to make your characters miserable.
Right.
And,
Oh, yeah.
And then give them a chance to rise above that. And the story actually came from, I read a diary of a woman who lived in Frontier, Kansas. Because when I researched it, what I discovered was Kansas was kind of like the armpit of the West because they had not yet discovered winter wheat in the 1870s, which means everybody was trying to grow corn and it wouldn't grow really well. And so people were selling their farms to kind of suckers back east. And my main character, her father was one of the suckers. And but there was this, I read this diary, the people who did stick it out, they were so proud of their heritage that there are tons of information about Frontier, Kansas and what life was like. Found a diary of a woman who was living in one of these sod houses and with her infant son and her husband went off to get provisions. And she was alone at night in this sod house. And all of a sudden, she hears scratching through the walls, and there are half a dozen gray wolves trying to dig through the sod walls to get to her and her baby. And she's like throwing stuff at them, and she like shot her gun out into the night, and they all scattered. And I thought there couldn't be anything creepier in the world than to have the only thing between you and a vicious beast be a wall of dirt.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh. But they're not just wolves; they're werewolves.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then this one, I'm so intrigued by this. I totally am. Brave New World. Tell me about this book.
Brave New World is an SAT vocabulary novel.
Hey,
Published.
wait. An SAT vocab. Right away, people are like, "Oh, really?" But
Well, it published by SparkNotes, which is the educational publishing division of Barnes & Noble. And the concept is to write a novel that teens would actually enjoy reading, but incorporate SAT level vocabulary words as you went along. So you got to read a story that they would read anyway, but they got to boost their vocabulary naturally instead of doing flashcards or things like that. And there are several different companies that do vocabulary novel type things, but SparkNotes was fantastic because they wrote stories. They wanted to have stories that would actually appeal to teens, not some of the other stories that are SAT vocabulary novels you can tell the people who wrote them were in love with vocabulary words, instead of being in love with a story that then the kids could actually benefit from as well. And so some of the other books in the series, they have a young adult vampire novel in their series. They have like a teen romance. They have an action adventure novel. And so, but I actually they actually hired me to write specifically just an SAT vocabulary novel.
it's really cool, the format. It's like, you've got just like any other book. I know you guys can't really see this on there, but on the bottom, there's a gray box, and it has the words that are being used in the story, which are bolded in the text with a short definition. Um, this is amazing. What a great concept. What a great way to teach reading and vocabulary and prepare them for standardized tests, which I'll hold my tongue on standardized tests.
Oh, you don't have to.
But it really is a great tool. It's a great idea. I'm totally impressed with this, and I want to read it. Okay.
Well,
It's
the thing for standardized testing, I am terribly anti-standardized testing, and it is because when I was in school, it was before FCAT, but SAT was the thing, and I had horrible test anxiety. horrible
Me
in
too.
school. I mean, my palms would sweat, and I was so nervous. And nobody said, I took my SAT the fall of my junior year. I never took it again. I'm like, that was miserable. I'm never doing that again. Nobody said, just taking it again, you'll get better. I mean, and so for a smart kid, I bombed my SAT. I graduated second in my class out of 450 kids. I didn't get any scholarship offers, nothing, because I didn't do well on a standardized test.
That's the same thing. My daughter graduated with and I don't know how they calculate this nowadays, but she graduated with like a 4.85 GPA because she took college courses while she was in high school. She was a straight A student, phenomenally talented artist, and she took the SAT and same thing. Test anxiety runs in the family. That's why I didn't do my master's program for like 10 years after I got my bachelor's degree because I knew that I was never going to pass the GRE. And I found a program that I was able to get into without the GRE. So I was like, woo, I get to do my, but it wasn't, I wanted to get an MFA, and that was really where my heart was. But instead, I ended up getting, a master's in mass media and society kind of thing, American media and popular culture, which is good. I learned a lot from it. But, you know, the idea of going back and getting an MFA is gnawing at
Oh, it
me.
was wonderful. Low
Yeah.
residency degree. It was really good. Yeah.
Major, I mean, because University of Tampa, I teach there, and they have an MFA program which started one semester after I got in. I was waiting all these years, going, they will have it one day, and I will be there, and I missed it by a semester. So I'm really thinking about going back and doing it, especially after hearing you say the impact it
Oh, it
had.
was wonderful. Yeah, because all
Definitely,
your concentration is in that one area, so it was really good.
it's
And
it's
plus
definitely
networking with other authors too, other writers.
that's what I'm looking forward to. Okay, so now, Sally, we have the Werecat Chronicles and Shadowcat.
Okay, well, I wrote Shadowcat first, and that was actually my master's thesis for. I have a Master of Arts and a Master of Fine Arts, and this was for the Master of Arts. And it's a paranormal romance. It's adult. It's on the spicy side, but probably tame by a lot of standards. But I, for some reason, I'm obsessed by werecats. I don't know what it is. I have this whole mythology of originating from the Egyptian cat goddesses, and so I built up all that. And this is about this woman who has gone to France, the Loire Valley, to restore artwork, and she meets this guy next door who turns out to be a werecat.
Wow. Very cool. And the Werecat Chronicles?
Werecat Chronicles is about, this is a young adult book. This is about a teen girl who doesn't really know that she's a werecat. Her parents are kind of hiding it from her because sometimes it skips a generation, and they're in denial about the whole thing. They don't really want to be werecats. So she doesn't know. She's going through all these changes, like she feels hot at night, and she goes and runs out in the woods, and um, she meets this boy in school who kind of helps her realize what she is, although his father is actually head of the opposing faction of evil werecats and wants to get the two together to
Oh.
unite the two houses.
So Werecats is basically we're shifting and going from the wolves
To the
to
cat.
the cats.
Yeah.
Which is a really great because I'm a cat person too. So it's definitely so Sally's books, yeah, these are big books.
And we both wrote Death Divided. We wrote that together. That's our
And
Alt Death
that's
trilogy.
yeah.
And that's the one we're newly releasing, but that's actually about internet vampire. It's about these kids in the northern neck of Virginia who have a murder club, and they kind of start getting bumped off one by one, and nobody really knows what's happening, so they have to investigate to find out what it is.
That's awesome. And we're going to talk about the let's talk about it now. The collaboration. How does that work?
Okay, well, we came up with an idea for what started out as one book, but it turned into a trilogy. So we kind of brainstorm together, and then we get together and we write out a really detailed outline. I mean, right down to like what the people are wearing sometimes and how the chapter hooks. And then we divide up the chapters, and we take the chapters we'd like, and then we put them back together, and then we read each other's chapters, and we have like first editing rights on the other chapter, but the other person can, refute it or agree or not agree. So it really is a collaboration.
Well, and Death Divided is 40,000 words. Our detailed outline was 8,000 words.
Wow.
So very, very detailed, chapter by chapter with hooks and everything. Because then as you write the story, you can switch chapters and you generally stay on the same page. We don't always agree. Like we did in Sally's chapter, the main character was a Mac person, and kind of the techie guy was a PC person. And at the time, I was not a Mac person. And but I worked in information technology for 10 years. And so I was like, but I can do the technology from a PC. I don't know how to do this from a Mac. So all my chapters, I change it back to a PC. And then she'd get to her chapters and she'd change it back to a Mac. And I was real adamant, and Sally was real adamant. She said, but that's just who she is. She has a Mac. And we realized that it actually, so what we came up with was that the main character had a Mac, the techie guy had a PC, and the fact that they had different technology is actually a key clue in the mystery.
So you took something that you couldn't really like agree to disagree
Yeah.
or to make the change, so you wrote it. That's really great.
Because we combine our chapters as we go along. Like you'll write 2, I'll write 2, and then we'll look at what we have. Because sometimes it can change the rest of the story too.
Wow. So do you guys want to read a little bit from the new one?
You want to read from Alt Death? Or
Yeah.
Death Divided now?
Well, it was originally published as altdeath.com, and when we got to the end, we realized that, oh my gosh, there's a sequel. And we outlined the second book, and we're like, damn, there's a trilogy. And so once we actually started work on the second book, we realized that we needed something that was a little bit more so that you could kind of get the feel for the series. So it's Death Divided. The second book is called Death Undone, and the third book is Death Denied. So, but the second book is all the characters we kill off in the first book, we get to resurrect as zombies in the second book.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
And in the third book, we have water vampires.
Aquavamps.
Aquavamps, yeah.
Okay.
And the 1939 New York World's Fair.
Wow. I like the idea of putting history in there. I used to really not like research, and I used to like go to my friends and go, "Hey, I kind of have this idea, and I know you really like to look stuff up." So, but I'm learning now. I'm going on and I'm actually looking things up and finding that I'm far more intrigued with the past um, than I am with the present. I'm not a big, I can't really visualize the future in a story so much because it all ends up being doomsday stuff for me, end of world stuff. Um, I can't like visualize some beautiful Mecca, some Shangri-La kind of world. So I found that I'm starting to retreat. Like I really love 1930s, 1940s New York. Um, I grew up in Germany, so I want to really kind of go in and learn more about what was going on in the late 1800s in Europe, and so I'm being drawn into that, and I'm thinking, if I really start to like this, learning about history, I could see it weaving itself into because I love to write short stories. And so I think being able to weave something like that into a short story where you don't have to
Mhm.
go too in depth, but enough to, to lend that reality to it, that's kind of exciting to me. It's like a whole new direction I'm going in. And I know you're a history buff, so
Well, I'm also an apocalyptic fan. So, you know, it's interesting to hear you say that when you look into the future, you see kind of this, you know, a dark future, and the world is coming to an end potentially. But really, was there ever an era where people didn't think that?
no, no, it's always been there.
And it doesn't happen. We survived last December.
I
Yeah, we did.
We're still here. Yeah, I know people that were totally prepared for that, and I'm like, really? I mean, really? Is it really? Because in 1999, New Year's, everybody went crazy because the computers are all going to shut down. It's 2000 and they don't know how to think to go to 2000 from 1999. And like all the nuclear weapons are going to get launched and we won't have electricity.
But they used to think the planet was going to get cool off and everything would get frozen.
Yeah, and it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, early 1900s, they had books about that. Yeah.
So I think probably with each, I don't know, century, maybe the idea of what happens at end of times changes. Like now I'm thinking we're all just going to be cooked. Like
Or drowned.
Or drowned. Yeah, because the water is definitely, yeah, that's right. The ice cap. Yeah. So who's going to read for me? Because I definitely want you guys to read a little bit from.
Okay, I'll read a little bit from Death Divided. This is actually the very first chapter.
Cool. See, isn't this show awesome? Because like you get previews like this about books. I love books. Definitely.
Oh, and this is the cover. Death Divided, the new edition.
And is this now just it's not in hardcover yet?
It is not. It is a Kindle original right now. So
we need to Nookify it pretty quick.
We do. Yeah, previous editions were available in lots of different formats, but again, this is a whole nother area, but Kindle is the lion's share of the ebook market still.
That's what I'm understanding. Even though my daughter went and bought me a Nook, I was like, yeah, I have 4 or 5 books on there. I still read them like this. But
it's my first book came out as an ebook in 2000. So
wow.
I've been an ebook proponent for a bunch of years.
Right.
And now it's just weird to see that so many folks are familiar with what an ebook is and use them all the time.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this the other day. It's like, back in the days, we used to go to book signings with 3.5-inch floppy disks. And,
yes.
And that's how long it's been. And now it's just like, poof, click, done.
Yeah.
And now I can carry around, a huge chunk of my library in my purse.
Yeah.
So
I know, and I'm ready to start transferring stuff onto my iPad.
We were in ebooks before ebooks were cool.
We were.
Wow. And I haven't really transferred any of my books into ebooks, and I guess it's time I need to consider doing that.
Oh, the tools are so user friendly now, and the key is to make sure that that you are aware of what a traditional book, the components of a traditional book, that you have a good cover, that you have a good, that you have all of the structures so that it feels like a traditional book.
Right.
And because a lot of folks think that if they just kind of pick a piece of clip art and slap their name on it, and then that will be a book, and it'll be a book, but nobody will buy it.
Right.
And it's a really tough challenge because there's a reason that we've had traditional publishers for all this time.
Right.
And there's a function that they serve, and if you're going to go and step outside of that, then you have to learn a lot more about the business than you do if you're just going to be a writer, I think.
I agree.
So.
Definitely.
Okay, really going to read, right? All right. So this is the prologue from Death Divided. Rachel swung one leg over the windowsill and shimmied down the maple tree outside her bedroom. The branches ended about 10 feet from the ground. Although she never talked about it, her parents had trimmed the tree way up, hoping it would keep her from ducking out at night. What a joke. Dropping the rest of the way, she landed with a crunch on a pile of autumn leaves. The smell of smoke from distant fireplaces tinged the night. Rachel tugged her short skirt back down and picked at her purple paisley blouse so it pulled across her chest. Prometheus would be pleased. She thought again about the last email he'd sent her. My dearest, tonight is the night. A scream will pierce the darkness. Your blood will run cold, and when the full moon scowls at it from its zenith, we will finally meet. And we will be together in the eternal night. All my love to you, Prometheus. A quiver crawled through her. This was just the thrill she craved, not the fake stuff that they manufactured with the Alt Death Club. Tori, Dexter, and the others just didn't get it. They wrote their little murder mysteries for each other, hoping for a jolt of excitement, but Rachel knew better. Prometheus had taught her you weren't living unless you took the risks you dreamed about. The Alt Death Club had its uses, though. She first met Prometheus in the group's online chat room. Rachel snuck along the side of the house. The full moon bounced her reflection off the living room window. She paused and stroked the tendrils of her long red hair, wrapping a few stray curls around her finger to make them lie down. Man, she looked washed out, and those bags under her eyes. She'd been tired lately, and her late night adventures didn't help any, but she hadn't realized how old she looked, and not in a good way. Perhaps just one more touch-up. She applied some blush and plum lipstick from the tiny purse at her waist. A face scowled back at her through the glass. Rachel jumped, then frowned back, raising her finger to her lips. Shh, she whispered. The figure opened the living room window. Take me with you. I want to go too, her 13-year-old sister Kathy said. No, Rachel said, and lower your voice. She didn't. Take me or I tell. Kathy had her sister's fiery red hair, but she kept it cropped short so it crimped into tiny curls like a clown's wig. You can't come. And what are you doing up anyhow? Go to bed. Some people don't get to have a computer in the room. Some people have to share the crappy one in the living room. And? Well, you're not the only one with a boyfriend. I had to email Danny. You don't even know where I'm going. How do you know you want to go? If it's worth sneaking out in the middle of the night, it's cool enough for me. Kathy popped out the window screen and straddled the ledge. The full moon loomed overhead. Prometheus could be waiting for her right now. Look, you can't come, but if you shut up and promise not to say a word to Mom and Dad ever, you can use my computer to email Danny. Tomorrow too? Rachel sighed. Whatever, I'm late. So what's the password? Kathy asked, not moving from the window ledge. The computer won't finish booting up without it. So how do you know it needs a password? Just give me the freaking password or I'll rat on you. Rachel narrowed eyes. It's Pandora, all lowercase. And if you change it once you get in, I'm going to kick your butt from here to Richmond. But then you'll have to tell Mom and Dad why you have a password on it to begin with. Kathy smirked and ducked back into the house, sliding the screen back in place and shutting the window behind her. Did Kathy know? She couldn't possibly. Kathy couldn't get on her computer or she wouldn't have asked for a password. Still, it unnerved her. She couldn't have anyone finding those files, especially not her bratty sister. She couldn't worry about it now. Prometheus called. Choosing the shortest path into the circle of oaks, she crept along the edge of the yard until she found a break in the forest undergrowth. The dewy grass slid through her toes, and she wished she hadn't worn sandals, no matter how slim they made her feet look. Frogs croaked, and unseen animals rustled in the underbrush. Raccoons, maybe mice. She was late. Good. He wanted more if he had to wait. She shuddered in anticipation, or was it something else that chilled her? Rachel glanced back at the house one more time. Her parents slept soundly, but in her own bedroom window she could see the faint glow of the computer monitor. Kathy had wasted no time in getting onto her Mac. A thought sliced through her brain. Would she ever see the white two-story again? Rachel shook her apprehension and darted into the forest. Her stomach might be somersaulting into her ribs, but the fear seared her brain and made her feel as if her actions mattered, if she could actually change her life or end it. A lone owl screamed from the trees. It dove into the bushes and swooped back into the darkness with a struggling rodent in its claws. Rachel skidded and turned her ankle, sending a stab of pain up through her leg. A cold blast of November air rippled her skirt, and she shivered. Okay, so she hadn't packed the best clothes for hiking through the woods, but she'd still look devastating if she could make it there in one piece. A circle of oak trees loomed ahead. For as long as she could remember, the circle of oaks protected her. They comforted her when she cried. They hid her when Kathy and the rest of her irritatingly middle-class family closed in on her. They sheltered her the night she and Clive had first been together. But Prometheus was no Clive. Clive might play the bad boy with his black leather and tattoos, but underneath he was just as much of a pushover as Tori was. Prometheus was different. She didn't know what would happen when they finally met weeks after chatting online. His words made her pulse race, but with the man, time to find out. Rachel stepped inside the circle of trees. Prometheus, my love. I'm here.
Wow.
And and it goes on. She actually meets him, and it's not good.
Wow. Yeah, that's and I love that whole cliffhanger thing. It's now see now I want to read it. I know you guys want to read it too. So let's talk about publishing. How does we did start a discussion which I will like restart in here, but it's all about how, publishers the demands they make and the things we tend to believe even though we don't necessarily need to believe them to be true. I mean, I'm easily intimidated by a no when it comes to my writing. It's like, no, okay, well, I guess I'll self-publish. Um, but I think being assertive and really believing in what it is you're putting out there has a lot to do with your success when it comes to publishing.
Well, Sally and I met at a writers group called the Brandon Writers Group. Um, Even though she lived in St. Pete and I lived in Tampa, and we drove all the way out to Brandon to go to this writers group. And she, one of the things that was really awesome about this group is that we kind of realized, even though we were all new writers, that it was just as important to get rejections as it was to get acceptances. And one summer, the group was kind of on hiatus, and one of the other members and I, we met every month during the summer to go through, and we had a competition to see who could get the most rejections over the course of a summer. And I had 17, and I won.
Wow. Wow. But that tells me that you sent a lot of work out.
Oh, absolutely. And you just can't get daunted because,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go through. I used to make lists of places that might like a story or a book that I'd written, and I just made an entire list, and I would start at the best place that I could possibly imagine getting published and work my way down. And if somebody got a rejection, I just crossed it off and I went to the next one. Because if you have to stop and say, what do I do next? Like they said no, and I put my blood and sweat and heart and soul and tears into this story, and you said no. If you have to think about it, you stop. But if you know where you're going next, you just keep going.
Which is, I know when I got my first rejection, um, I sent a piece to like some women's, I don't even remember, some women's magazine, and I got the rejection back, and it was just this little form letter. It wasn't even really signed by anybody,
Yeah.
and I was absolutely devastated. I was like, I'm no good at this, and what was I thinking? And I can never do this, and I actually stopped writing for a lot of years, because I just felt, you know, oh my gosh, I'm no good. Um, when I went back to college at age 39, I had a teacher, Ned Johnson, who was just like, foot in the butt the whole time. He really kind of reignited my love for writing. And I wrote a story and I was like, ooh, it's kind of a science fiction-y kind of thing. And that's definitely not but I thought it was really just this really cool story. And I sent it to a science fiction magazine. Of course, I've never read. By the way, when you submit something, read what you're submitting to first. And I submitted it, and I got a rejection back. At this time, it's a great story, but at this time, we're not. And again, I was devastated, and I'm like, I'm just no good at this. So that was, I don't know, 2003, and I haven't submitted anything since then.
Shame on you.
I know, and people are like, "Well, why aren't you submitting?" I'm like, just writing books and self-publishing them and throwing them out there, and they're like, "But why aren't you like submitting your poetry to poetry magazines, and why aren't you submitting your short stories to?" And I'm thinking, well, because I suck. I'm not good enough. And that's a problem. That's a confidence issue because I do feel I'm a good writer. And that one conversation we had. So you told me the same thing happened to you. You wrote a book. You wanted to send it to a publisher. Same with me. I wrote my novel. Major publisher. Tor's huge. And when that whole thing fell apart, I was like, I'm just going to self-publish it, and I've never promoted it at all, ever. I think I've sold 2 copies. Well, no, I've sold more now because Ned Johnson has making it an option in his fiction writing class that they can read that to. So, and I get all excited and go, "Ooh, 3 people bought my book.
Yeah.
Yay." But I don't, how do you feel that a writer can gain the confidence? What do they need to do in order to even send it out there, to have the confidence to send it out and then deal with the rejection?
I think the best thing to do is go to writers groups. Well, you can start by going to going to a writers group in your own town and critiquing each other's work, so you're not writing in a vacuum. But after that, go to writers conferences to talk with editors and agents, and you can practice pitching. And you can be horribly afraid at first, but then after a while, you do it so many times that you're not that afraid. But I found with people, overwhelmingly, it's like on a personal connection that they get published. When I was trying to get Shadowcat published, I sent it out at different places, but I went to a writers' conference and I met the editor from Phase, and she took it. She published it. So it was that personal connection, and I hear that from other people too. So I would say pick out whatever genre you're writing in, try and find conferences in that genre and go to those conferences. Because the networking is just invaluable.
I agree. I agree. I think that with a lot of writers, that they are in a vacuum.
Hmm.
After hearing you say that, it's like, you write something and when you're done, you're like, "Ah, okay, it's done. What do I do now?" And it's kind of like the vacuum kicks in, like, I don't know, what do I do now? Where do I go? Who do I give it to? Who do I?
You get a copy of Novel and Short Story Writers Market or Poets Market,
I have it.
and you go through and you find places that look like they would um, publish the kinds of things that you like. And some of them have really good detailed listings, and the rest of it is kind of a shot in the dark. But you do a bunch of it, and eventually I wrote one adult novel. It was an adult techno thriller. It got rejected 40 42 times. And then I finally found a publisher for it, and it went on to win the Dream Realm Award for Best Action Adventure Novel. But if I had stopped at 42, it would have never found a home. But if you think, I actually take my stack of rejection letters to schools and I say, look, this is what I had to put up with, everything from form letters to rejections that were like, did they even read my book? Or I have one that was about, they rejected me and 7 other people on the same sheet of paper. It's like the same little form letter that it was horrible, but you can't, because the only difference between a published writer and an unpublished writer is that the published writer never gave up. That's it.
It makes sense. I mean, Gone with the Wind was rejected something like 27 times before it finally got picked up. So I have heard that from a lot of writers have said, it's a numbers game. It's like when you're in sales. If you go to 99 houses and you get 99 rejections, if you'd gone to the 100th, you probably would have made a sale. But like you said, if you stop, the numbers are going to go against you. And I guess you really kind of have to have a thick skin, when you get a rejection and not take it personally. And I think that's what a lot of writers do.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, some person that I've never met that sits behind a desk and sends these letters out en masse didn't like my work. And, and it's a personal affront to me as a writer, and I must suck because they did, all those things. I've talked to so many writers that are like, I'm not submitting my work because I'm not good. I'm no good. I'm not a good writer because that form letter says so.
Well, later on, when you get personalized rejections, you're thrilled. Like
See, and
sometimes they
that,
can write
yeah.
pages too, and that's like, oh wow,
I'm a
that's
spy, and I did with my novel when I sent it to the publisher. He sent me back like a 5-page in a binder. It was very lovely, and he basically said, this is really great. This is really great, but you need to take this out and move that. And I'm thinking, but no, because the story is complete this way. I cannot make changes. And I know that that's another thing you have to do to a degree. There are certain changes you have to make, but taking out entire chapters because they're too graphic or not graphic enough or don't, whatever. It's like you're gutting a story and
yeah.
requiring someone to rewrite the story to something that you think is okay. And I think nowadays with all the different ways that you can publish, the publishing companies don't have the power that they used to have. Self-publishing used to be like the death mark on you. If you self-publish, you might as well just give up your career because you will never go anywhere.
Yeah.
I can remember that. And when I self-published my first poetry book, people were like, "Oh, you did it now. You're never gonna no one's ever gonna publish you because you sell." And I'm thinking, really? Well, whatever. It's fine. I'll sell them out of my trunk and whatever. But that's not the case now. There's a lot of large publishing houses that peruse through self-publishing sites and find things they're interested in and publish them.
I still say though, um, it should not be your reaction to getting a rejection. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be an immediate choice if you don't, if you are an unpublished author, because um, if if you self-publish your book, even if it's the most brilliant book on the face of the planet, um, there's still really good odds that people aren't going to find it.
Absolutely.
And so you have to be, you have to be a marketing whiz. You have to really be out there and passionate and pushing your story. And there are things that a traditional publisher can give you that self-publishing is not going to get you.
Right.
And I think that self-publishing, especially now that the technology is so much more accessible, I think it's a really good option for um, established authors whose backlist has gone out of print
Okay.
and they still have fans. But I think that it shouldn't be your first choice.
And that's I agree. I agree. And I think the people I know that are doing it, myself as well, it's totally and wholly a confidence thing. Like, oh, I think it's great and my circle of friends think it's great. And when I go to an open mic and I share a poem, they go, wow, that's really great. And when I go to a book signing, they're like, wow, this book is really great. Um, but and that gives me the confidence to think, wow, maybe it's really great. But the idea of, sending it out there to some unknown, has no idea who I am or what I'm about, and they're going to read it and probably go, oh, this is not so great, and send me something saying that. It's terrifying, I think, for a writer. And that I think that confidence is, you have to have it if you're going to make it. You have to have that. You have to be able to handle the rejection.
I know something that has really helped me is having beta readers, and that is having people who write in the same kind of genre that you do, and you read each other's books and give constructive criticism. That really helps me a lot.
Great idea. Great idea. I didn't even think about that.
It isn't even like you're exchanging chapters. Just give the person the whole book and ask what they think.
That's a great idea.
It really is. It's a really big help.
All right. So going to writers' conferences, beta readers. I'm taking mental note, and I'll have to write down the name of the apparatus because I am so totally distracted when I'm on my laptop.
The Neo.
On my Mac, actually, the Neo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like writing away, and then I see, ding, somebody, look, Facebook message
Yeah.
or email, and it's like, I'm just going to check real quick. And like
I
3
s-
hours go by, and I'm still on.
I sometimes just shut my internet box off. Just shut it off.
Ah, ah,
Because internet is the biggest time waster. It really is.
I know.
It's great for research, but you can just waste a lot of time. on it.
Yeah, I'm definitely learning that. So I like the idea that there's something out there. It's kind of like, remember when word processors were the thing? There was no
Oh, yeah.
it's just you typed on it. It was like an
Yeah.
electric typewriter, but it printed on paper with little holes
Yeah.
on the.
9-pin dot matrix. That's what that was, and I had one.
I do. I remember the first one I bought. I went into like debt beyond belief because it was new technology. I think I spent like $3,000 on it and had to make payments on it. But it was like, oh, I can type this and it'll print it out, and I could move stuff around, and you know, it was really cool. And I have a keyboard for my iPad, so like I have some program where it's just a yellow notepad,
Yeah.
and I'm like, ooh, but I still have internet. I have Wi-Fi on there,
It's
so
gonna get
Yeah.
I need to
distracting.
turn the Wi-Fi off.
But
So
Sally, one of the things talking about rejections and getting feedback from agents and editors. You get everything from that, you know, just form letter rejection to really good constructive criticism. And I think, Sally, you've had some really good experience with
Oh,
people
yeah.
really going out of their way to give you feedback
Yeah.
on stories that actually help. So tell.
Well, I had this last book I've been shopping around to agents, and I had Neil Gaiman's agent really like it,
Wow.
and she gave me a round of edits. I did those as best I could. She said, "No, not quite." So I did another round and couldn't please her. She wanted more character depth, and I gave it everything I had, and I couldn't do it, so I don't know. But yeah, it's stuff like that. I've had other agents give me really good critiques too.
But do you always do everything that an agent says?
Oh, no, I think you have to weigh it. If you think it's good for the book, I would do it. If not, probably wouldn't do it. If it's Neil Gaiman's agent, I'd probably do whatever she asked. Actually,
Well, and that's the I think one of the most important things uh, in terms of submitting is when you get feedback back, there's a middle ground between doing everything that they say or doing nothing that they say. You have to evaluate their feedback and figure out what actually fits for their story. And a lot of times they will give you feedback that will help.
Right.
But just because it wasn't your initial first thought on something doesn't mean that it's not valid feedback. But they could also be totally off base.
Right.
So, and that all goes back to the confidence thing that we talked
Yeah.
about, is you have to know where your story is and where it fits the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah.
the feedback she gave me was great. It made it a better book. It really did.
And that's, in the end, that's what it's all
Mhm.
about. Websites, web addresses, email. How can people find your work?
SallyBosco.com.
LynnHansen.com, LYNNEHANSEN.com,
And
and
Sally
Facebook.
and Sally Bosco there's no E on the end. It's
SALLY.
BOSCO. So when is the second installment coming out?
This summer, we're actually in revisions right now.
How
And
long did
so-
it take you to write that? The first one?
Oh, it took a long time because it was a much, we cut it down quite a bit. It was a longer book. I think it took a couple of years, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
And we were both working on solo projects at the same time.
And we had
Okay.
full-time jobs
So,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we've been critique partners for over 20 years.
Wow.
And not to date ourselves or anything. But it's just been this invaluable relationship. And to be able to work on a story together is just fantastic.
So how long did it take for the second one?
Longer.
Shorter?
Oh,
Longer?
well, it took us, it took us a long time to get around to it. We had the outline for a long time.
We did, and again, working on other projects, and it was tough, but it's one of those things. The story has a strong ensemble cast, where the characters, when we were working on the outline for the second book, it's like we just knew how these characters would behave and how they would talk, and they just wanted their story to continue. And it's and so we really felt compelled to do the sequel. So
I think it's really cool. When I wrote my novel, I didn't use an outline. I had a story in my mind from beginning to end, and it came out that way. But I did, and I do, give my characters life. I do background, like a character sketch, and everything from the way they look and the food they like to eat and where they were born and what their childhood was like. And it's really funny because to me that's an even longer and more detailed process than it is writing the book, because I'm like 5 pages into this character and I'm thinking, oh, I'm not going to put all of that into the story, because that would be a book in itself just on that character. But I did find that, as I was writing the story, the way the character spoke and reacted to certain things all kind of fell into place because of writing that character sketch. Do you think that's a really a good tool to use for?
Oh, it definitely is because you have to know your characters, know how they'd react, to know how the plot's going to go. So yeah, I'd probably do those first.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's really important, but you also, if you get a character that becomes fleshed out, you will get these just golden opportunities. I had a character in a novel that I was working on, and he was always on the cell phone, and I had no idea why he was always on the cell phone. I mean, it worked for the story and it worked for the plot, but I was like, why is this character always wanting to pull out his cell phone? And I got to the end of the book, and I'm like, oh, that's why. But the character, it was just that character. It was a very important piece of the story when I got to the end, but I found that opportunity. I mean, I knew who he was, and once he started to kind of come to life, you know, those pieces, you have to be open to those opportunities, even if they weren't in all
And the
that good
right,
books are.
right. And I
So,
always, when it comes to character development, I always think about Stephen King and how he lives through his characters. I mean, he becomes the character. And my friends, when I would talk to them, go, when I wrote that book, I was that character. And like, ooh, you're kind of scary then, because were you thinking for her? And I'm like, oh yeah, it was totally like channeling, and I was her, and I had to step out of that and go back. And they're like, oh, that's So the joke is that's just too Stephen King. But it works. I mean, it definitely works. So yes, please do go on sallybosco.com, lynhansen.com, Hansen,
Yep.
Bosco, Bosco, and like check out all these really amazing. I love holding books,
I love
flipping
holding books
pages.
too. Look, I'm holding books too. I'm holding more books than you.
Oh, by far, by far. And I now that I have an iPad, it's like I see it coming. There's going to be lots of because I got like the 128 gig one. I mean, what could I even remotely put on that thing to take up 128 gigs? So, um, but yeah, I'm leaning. I'm leaning more. I like carrying it. It's in my purse. I'm like, yeah, it's all good. Um, so yes, definitely check these amazing writers out, and I want to thank you ladies so much for being on the show.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
Great.
I need to bring you back several times because like there's just a ton of stuff to talk about. So again, thank you, Lynn Hansen and Sally Bosco, and thank you for listening to Right at Five. And I'm gonna be taking a little break for a few weeks while some transitions going on, but I will be back with more guests, and we will definitely have these lovely ladies back too. So thanks for listening, and have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.